Thank you, everyone. My name is Samer Forsley. I'm the CEO of Simutech Multimedia, and I'll be conducting today's webinar. I am joined today by my colleague, Luciana, who is going to be our moderator. If you have any questions throughout the chat, please use the Q&A function to ask questions, and then she will either reply to them or forward them to me, and then we can just kind of discuss them. So feel free to ask questions anytime during the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available early next week, probably Monday or Tuesday, for those who have attended the webinar. Today's webinar will probably take about half an hour, depending on how many questions we get at the end, but give or take half an hour. We will be talking about some of the issues related to training people to do electrical troubleshooting, some best practices, how to set up your organization, and then do a quick demo of our product. So our agenda today, just talk a little bit about the skills gap. We hear about that quite a bit. Talk about troubleshooting and the nature of troubleshooting. Is it getting harder or just different? We're going to talk a little bit about learning and retention, discuss some strategies to rolling out training, especially electrical troubleshooting, and then do the demo. So that should take us about, like I said, about 25 minutes or 30 minutes, and then depending on what questions we get. So let's just talk first about the skills gap. I mean, we hear about it a lot. We read a lot about it. What is it? And one of the things that is often discussed when it comes to the skills gap is it generational? Is it a new crop of new grads who have some basic electrical knowledge, but maybe don't have enough experience with industrial troubleshooting? Maybe just a lack of skilled labor out there. But primarily it's like the millennials and the Gen Zers are like, the face of it. And that's true. There's a lot of new people joining the workforce all the time. But, the way we see it and the way we encounter it, at least on our side, is that the skills gap has both the younger generation, but also the older generation. The older generation is facing a lot of changes at work, a lot of automation, things that you used to troubleshoot in the past, but now are new. And how do you approach them? How do you think about them? And so almost the skills gap is double-ended from a generational point of view, where you have both sides of it who are having challenges with how you troubleshoot, especially electrical components. Sometimes you hear the skills gap is educational, or maybe not enough education is happening there. And that is maybe true. I mean, schools, community colleges are cranking out a lot of people with the skill. So it seems like there's enough base knowledge. There's certainly a lot of companies out there who actually also have a lot of e-learning content. For example, TPC is a company we are familiar with. So is DuPont and others that are primarily providing e-learning content and providing that good base knowledge. So that doesn't seem to be the issue. There's enough knowledge out there. The question, is there something else? And I've heard a lot from some of our customers that maybe it is social. Maybe there's a perception, especially when it comes to manufacturing, that the skills gap is because people perceive manufacturing to be dirty or not cool. And that's something that needs to be addressed and discussed, because, actually there's a lot of innovation in manufacturing, a lot of interesting things that are happening on the assembly line. We hear about IoT, we hear about automation. And so there is a change in the way manufacturing operates, and maybe some of those social barriers can be broken and new blood injected into the system, so to speak. But maybe the skill gap itself is cognitive, in that trying to understand how to apply all that knowledge and all that learning that you've done before you got to work, and apply it in a way where you can actually effectively think through problems and troubleshoot. So with that in mind, if you think about what usually happens on a factory floor, there's two types of errors. And this is based on research done by the Industrial Technology and Robotics Education and Training study group. And basically they found that there's two errors. The first error you kind of commit are knowledge-based errors. So you can commit an error or create a problem if you don't have a base knowledge of the actual components or the thing you're trying to address. In many cases, people are just not familiar or aware or understand fully the manufacturer's instructions on how to actually deal with a component, how to understand how it works, how to troubleshoot and fix it. But in many cases as well, there's really a lack of understanding of how you actually test that the work you've done is done correctly and accurately. So those knowledge errors can be addressed. Like I said, there's a lot of providers out there who can help with that base knowledge, and it could be even the manufacturer themselves that can help you understand how to use those components and this equipment. Okay. The other side of it is really observed errors, which really comes into place when you're not using the right application for that base knowledge. So you know it, but you're not applying it correctly. And that happens is when you encounter a problem, and there could be possibly many solutions, and you're not really sure what's the best course of action. And in some cases, there is not a solution. So in the electrical world, it could be many ways of actually fixing a problem, and sometimes you're just not sure, or sometimes the solution is to actually replace a part, right? Or you know, actually it's the best way to describe it, just to replace the part or to change the process completely. So and when you're faced with situations where there's many solutions or no solution, you then have to try to rely on something to solve the problem. But if there isn't a defined process for you to do that, then you will struggle. And so if you think about some of those issues, and we kind of look at other research, this is another study that was conducted by the Engineering Psychology and Cognitive Ergonomics Journal. These are all a mouthful for sure to say, but good research nonetheless. So when you look at what is the issue, first issue that comes to mind is that there is there's not a systematic approach to thinking through problems. So when you have many potential solutions and you don't have a process, then you are going to struggle. And so you need to have some type of systematic approach to actually troubleshooting and thinking through these problems. Okay. But the other issue is, again, is the fact that people don't understand how these parts works functionally, or how they actually work at a systems level. So you may know, for example, what a relay does or how it works, but you're not really having a full grasp of how it actually fits in the system and how you actually troubleshoot it when that is not functioning correctly. So you need to have a systematic approach, and you need to kind of learn how to fix problems as in a system at a functional level, not just at a component level. So if you think about that in terms of an industry that we're probably all familiar with, the airline industry, a pilot is going to learn how to fly a plane in school. They're going to learn how to take off and land, how to navigate, but they don't just jump into a jet and take it for a ride, right? They kind of have to sit in a simulator and learn somewhere how to approach these problems and how to actually operate it. So there has to be a understanding of what speed means for the plane, altitude, airspeed, stalling, etc. But then you have to apply them in the context of the whole system and understand what that means and practice, right? And if you have a proper process in place, then you can pretty much figure your way out of many issues that you would encounter if you're flying the plane. And once you build enough base knowledge, then you can go and actually start building more time flying either a stripped down jet first, or then really doing flights in the real thing with somebody guiding you. So the next issue that we need to talk about is this automation paradox. So this is, Forrester Research has been spending a lot of time and energy on this topic and have kind of coined the automation paradox word. Just simply put, the more you automate, the longer the time to resolve a problem will be. And so it's kind of counterintuitive why that is. But if you look at what automation is doing, it really is automating easy repetitive tasks to solve. So as technology improves and as it improves on the factory floor, some of these equipment and machines are going to diagnose themselves and maybe even fix themselves, right? But what that means is that it leaves complex tasks and time-consuming tasks to the individual. And so the issue with it is that as time goes on, an employee is facing way more complex tasks all the time. And that is going to throw off the first metric that is familiar to everybody, which is the mean time to repair. Okay. So what does actually mean, or what does it matter? Well, that means something very interesting. The studies all point to a very simple thing. The time between incidents as automation comes into play is going to increase over time. But when the incidents happen, they will be more severe and they will take way, way longer to repair. We don't see airplanes flying out of the sky like we used to in the 50s and 60s. That's because, thankfully, to automation, many of those menial tasks or like repetitive tasks are taken over by autopilots and so on. But when they break, you, the pilot, have to figure out how to solve a problem that you don't usually encounter, because the time between incidents is just way too long. And so back to the concept of the whole simulation and what pilots do. If you think about a pilot, their job is not necessarily to take off and land the plane or to turn left or right. Their job is to communicate, but their job is to actually fix problems when they come. A pilot really is a master troubleshooter. And the way they hone their troubleshooting skills is to actually sit in the simulation and over time practice things that they don't see all the time. Engine out, both engines out, ditch in the ocean, etc. Right? And so your job as a pilot is to continue to practice things that you don't encounter all the time, so that when they do happen, you know how to troubleshoot and how to take care of your passengers and then land that plane safely. So training is not enough. We had a webinar with our colleague and friend Stephen Sears from Chrysler last month, who has spent a lifetime studying the skills knowledge retention issue. And the main piece of his research, and he's doing a PhD in the topic, is the fact that if you learn something and you don't use it, you will lose it. And that retention gap, or the loss in knowledge, happens so fast. So within a month of learning something and not using it, you are going to retain only 75%. So you will lose 25% of that knowledge, okay? And the more time goes on and you haven't practiced somehow, you will lose more. And that will lead to additional breakdowns, that will lead to situational loss awareness, that will lead to errors and maybe safety issues that your staff may encounter. So you need a way for them to continue to retain and practice that skill that they learned somehow. And so he presented this slide, which basically showed that you're pretty much at below 70% after 2 months of learning something. And the way to fix that is to reintroduce learning and practice often. So it is not sufficient for you to teach something and walk away. You have to kind of come back and practice it over and over and over. And if you do that, then you pretty much, excuse the word, flatten the curve, because we're all familiar with that right now, but you pretty much flatten that retention curve and you kind of retain that knowledge and keep it with you all the time. So when you encounter it, you're ready to solve it. So again, back to our slide on what the airline industry does. A pilot who has been flying for 10, 15, 20, 30 years does not stop going to the simulator. They have to, A, by law, but also by good practice, show up, sit in the simulator, and re-hone those skills all the time so they can fly safely. And so what you need to do is you kind of need to provide that practice so that people can retain that knowledge that they learned somewhere else. And so if you think about what you need to do that, you need a systematic approach, and a systematic approach to actually training somebody, especially when they're doing electrical troubleshooting, is actually the best way to go. And so it is far more effective. This is a study that was also published not too long ago that basically shows that if you have a structured troubleshooting way of solving problems, it will take you a lot less time to learn it, but also to solve problems. It's far more effective if everybody's following a systematic approach. It's also cheaper. It takes about 33% less time to onboard a new employee and train them to troubleshoot if you are following a systematic approach. But the important thing about it as well is that it's consistent. So, I know some people, for example, use something like the buddy system, and that is not consistent because everybody's training the next person has their own take on things. A systematic approach is consistent, and everybody in the organization can basically approach problems the same way. We, for example, have our 5-step process. It is available online for anybody who wants to download it. Actually, there's a more elaborate workflow for this that we make available to everyone. But our process is to observe what's happening in a situation, define the problem area, narrow it down to that area where you have an issue, identify all possible causes and problems. Then from that point on, test, get the right measurements, interpret those results, and then replace and repair, and then test before you finish. And so people who go through our training follow this process, but you don't have to follow this process if you have your own. That is fine, as long as you have a systematic approach to training and troubleshooting that everybody's following. So, and having that is not enough. You have to put in place a training organization, and training, especially when it comes to troubleshooting and electrical, has to become a cultural thing. And really there are 3 points here. There's one, ownership of training, scheduling the training, and accountability. So in the ownership piece, it is not enough to kind of take on a training project without having corporate visibility. It is important for people to understand the importance of why you're doing that training. And it's very important for people to know that you are tracking to a success metric and you're meeting the success metric. And training does not mean, if you want to be successful at it, whether you are using the Simutech product or using a different product, that you kind of set it and forget it. It actually takes a village to kind of do this. So you need the managers to be involved so they can commit to the schedules. You need administrators to follow up. You need coaches who have been there, done that, and are able to guide a new recruit so they can actually make sure that the training is happening at the right pace and make sure that the training is being effective. You need that staff commitment, and you need the company commitment. We've published a letter that both the employee and the manager sign, where they're both committing. So the manager is committing to spending the money on the training, but the employee is also committing to completing and taking on the training. So it's a two-way conversation between staff and the company, and creates that culture of learning. You also need the right tools for learning, and it is not sufficient to have one solution. In many cases, just very much like a pilot does not just jump in the plane and fly it. They sit in the simulator, but the simulator is not enough because it requires some base knowledge. So you have to acquire that base knowledge somewhere, and different people learn different ways. And so you have to kind of look at what are you trying to teach the staff and assemble the tools needed to make sure they acquire the knowledge, practice the knowledge, and put it into place. And hopefully by the time you do that, you create that cadence, that culture of everybody's talking about, you know, the training and what we're doing, and everybody's succeeding together. You have to schedule training. You can't just set it and forget it. You can't just buy whatever software or whatever training you've done and just give it to the team. You have to have a schedule that's realistic, that people can meet. At Simutech, we recommend 2 hours a week. That's plenty. And you can't say, well, we're busy to train. Busy is like the result of people not understanding or lacking the ability to, for example, in terms of troubleshooting, fixing issues fast and getting to the point where problems are resolved once and for all. And so if you're hearing that it's busy and we can't train, that is the result of the lack of training, not the cause of lack of training, right? So make sure if you're taking on training for your organization, especially for electrical troubleshooting, that you're scheduling those 2 hours a week to make sure people are actually benefiting from the investment you just made. And accountability, right? So we're big advocates of checklists here. Make sure you have one. Have you completed this? Have you done that? What have you learned? So checklists are a great way. Again, the airline industry uses them all the time because they're fairly effective. They don't have to be elaborate, but they could just be basic points that you and the staff agree to make sure that you've finished certain things or completed certain milestones within your training. And training has to be reviewed with the employee, right? How did you do? How's your score? You did great? Good. Did you enjoy a piece? Was there an area that you thought you wanted more training? If you're struggling, why are you struggling? Look at the data and make sure you're adjusting the employee's training plan based on what the data is telling us. If somebody is struggling with, for example, shorts to ground, okay, great. What can you do to make sure that they have that information available to them so they learn it and then go back and practice it and learn it, right? And that all happens with additional assessments. You just need to assess the employee and make sure you have a baseline. Without that baseline, how do you know how they progress? So make sure you have an assessment somehow, and then use that assessment to progress the employee to the desired outcome. And finally, we touched on continuous training a lot, so I'm not going to spend time on it, but make sure you have some sort of reward and recognition for completion. Sometimes it's fun to kind of have some internal challenge. Whoever finishes a certain amount of training by X date gets something, or some people tie it to a raise, some people tie it to promotion, etc. It's good to have the employee feel recognized and rewarded for completing the training, but also practicing what they learned in a real factory floor and seeing the fruit of their labor. So if you're new to us, we've been around for some time. We service the manufacturing industry. We really provide simulation-based training to teach people how to troubleshoot electrical equipment. And the great thing about what we do is we provide it in a video game environment, so it's an easy way to learn. Trainees, have to solve about 400 faults altogether to finish at least the first path through the system, and then they have those to come back and practice again. And the great thing about what we do is we give managers that data to observe and see how they can actually troubleshoot. So I'm going to do a quick demo of our new product. So many of you are maybe familiar with our current product in the market. It's installed on a PC. It basically takes you through electrical troubleshooting. You learn the concepts of how to apply our systematic approach, how to use a meter, how to read schematic, things like that. And then from there on, you go to control circuits, then motor circuits, then PLCs, and then after that, you get into process controls and sensors and so on. So if you're familiar with that, that's great. If not, I'm going to show you the new stuff anyways, which is kind of similar, give or take. So our journey with troubleshooting starts with you entering a module. We have two types of modules. There's either learning labs or learning modules where you are learning a concept, learning how to, learning what a relay or what a motor does, and so on. Or you are basically troubleshooting. And what is our first module? It's really our foundational module. It is what you need to learn to troubleshoot electrical components. And so everything starts for us with a work order. And in this case, I have to repair the lightning circuit. So I'm going to begin. The first thing I want to point out as this is loading is that this is loading in a browser. And so that is a new way of us delivering the content. It is web-based. It will integrate into an LMS if you have one. If you don't, you can use ours. But it really is an easy way for tracking data and having the visibility corporate-wide. I'm not sure why it's taking so long. So let me see. Froze. But anyway, so it is browser-based, and let me just reload it again because it's been loading for a while. It's been in the background for a while. So let me just see if I can trigger that again. Sorry about that. Just give it a minute, sir. Are there any questions in the meantime?
We have a comment over here from Elizabeth. She's telling us about the certificates of completions.
Yeah.
That I guess she's using these ones, and she says are great rewards. So probably we can talk a little bit more about what other things we can use.
Yeah, so we do provide in our current product certificates of completion. Of course, that is basically going to be slightly different with the new one. But certificates of completion, you're right, are a great way of making sure people have that on their record and they can feel that they've accomplished something. So we are now providing similar accomplishment through dashboards and through reports through the LMS. So you would have that available there. The other thing that I would say is that in some cases, it's good to have that record of completion. And in some cases, back to the points we were trying to make earlier, it's good to come back and practice and practice and practice. So some elements of learning have an end result to them and some don't, right? And so some you just kind of have a record of training instead of a record of completion. So I'm not sure why this is failing me right now and it's not working, but I'm trying to. All right. Any other questions in the meantime?
No. Yeah, we do have two questions over
here. Go ahead.
So Addison Polsha, he's asking us about what are the current locations that we're using Georgia Pacific is using us. So
Yeah, we can take that offline. I mean,
yeah,
we don't
like
need to.
we can
Yeah,
talk,
okay.
like we can talk about it later.
Okay.
And yeah, so
Yeah, the question
basically-
was related to a customer of ours, and the question which locations they are using us, and we'll just refer that to the sales team. So I'm gonna, it's loaded, thankfully. So so one of the main differences that other than this is being web-based is that this is 3D and allows for more immersive experience in terms of navigation. So the way it works is just basically point and click to where you want to go, and it will take you there. So if I wanted to look inside the panel here, I am able to do that. In this case, if I press on the button, it should have turned on, but it hasn't. And so what I need to do is I need to probably take some measurements and see what this is telling me. I can quickly look at my schematic diagram here and try to understand how the system is wired up and where I can probably take some measurements. So let me take a measurement at the push button first and see what that does. So for that, I'm gonna grab my meter. And so I can turn that on to voltage. I wanna do that. So I'm gonna grab my lead and put it here. Grab this guy, see, I'll put it here and see what I get. So I have voltage up to that point. So that is good. If I go back to my schematic diagram here, that's probably the last step here. The next component is the relay. If I look at the relay is energized. So that's interesting that the relay is energized, but the light bulbs are not on. So I'm gonna take a measurement over at the relay. So I'm gonna click and get to it. The one thing you would notice is that the components are all, you can actually click, hold, and you get this orbiting tool, and you can like try to observe around them. Sometimes you may be looking for a loose end or whatever. And in many cases, you can zoom in and take a look at the component itself and see some of its specs, okay? But I can just grab my lead. Where'd it go? It's right here. And I'm gonna place it here. Let me just zoom in. I'm gonna place it here. And I don't have voltage at this point, and I know I'm shortcutting the process just to show the demo. But odds are there's something off with this relay. I mean, I can take additional measurements just to kind of prove out that there's a problem with this relay itself. But for the interest of the demo, what I really need to do, if I need to replace this relay, is probably faulty. So I cannot do that. If I do that, I will get booted out of the system. I don't want to do that. I need to follow my proper safety procedures. So in this case, I am going to lock my circuit and do my lockout tagout. You'll see here that if you're familiar with our existing software, this is a more enhanced way of actually doing the verify for dead. There's actually a new module that we've added into the system that teaches you how to do that and makes you actually go through the whole process of verify for dead. We don't make you do it in this module. We just make you accept the results. So the result is okay. I don't have. I'm going to put my meter away, and now that the system is safe to operate, I can go back here. And if I go over to the relay, I can either view its specs or replace it. I want to replace it. And you'll see, just like we had in the previous module, we do keep track of the dollars spent on the components and the time used to troubleshoot. Now that I've kind of replaced this, I can just go and remove my lock, turn my power back on, and navigate back. And if I've done this work correctly, the light should come back on. Okay, great. So I'm done. I exit, and I actually want to exit this fault. Yes, I do. I'm going to get a result screen. So you will notice that our new system has a different way of displaying results compared to the old one. So the scoring has been enhanced. We are now reporting on the three things, primarily the safety, accuracy, so you can't change parts, you can't not follow safety procedures. And in this case, I did look 100%. I was so effective at troubleshooting, but I was really, I knew the result and I was shortcutting the process. So all that to say that the next thing, which is hiding here behind this bar, is an OK button and a troubleshoot next. In the past, or in the current version of the software, you go through the basic faults and intermediate faults and advanced. And when you finish those, you get your certificate, but there's bonus level faults and genius level faults that are intended for people to keep training or for assessment. With this system, with the new one, it is operating slightly different. We don't have such a thing anymore. You basically troubleshoot and get the next one. And based on your skill set, the system is watching what you're doing and is going to dish out the next fault based on how well you're solving the previous ones. So if you're a master troubleshooter and you're fairly advanced, you will move through the modules a lot faster and get to that point where you're now just continuously practicing. If you're somebody who is new and you just finished school or you just learned the basics of electrical, you will spend more time troubleshooting easier faults until you build your scores high enough for the system to automatically advance you to the next one. So that's give or take how the system is set up. I'm going to go back to my slides.
We have a few questions here.
Okay,
so we can go through these ones.
Go
So
ahead.
what are the operating requirements for this new system? We have the recommended specifications here.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So the question was, what are the specs? So this works on a PC and it works on a Mac. Our current software only works on a PC. So this works on a PC and a Mac. It does not work on tablets. It does not work on Chromebooks or anything like that. But you do need to have a decent internet connection with 10 megabits down for you to be able to reliably use it. If you're interested, we can email you the full spec of your of what's required. Interestingly enough, we have a page on our website where you can click on that, and then it will go through your browser and tell you if your computers are compatible with the software or not. So it's easier for you to find out. But it is able to operate on a Mac and a PC.
Okay, great. And we do have another question over here. Based on load time from presentation, would there be issues with sites who have limited bandwidth?
Yeah, so I'm not sure why I struggled with loading it. I think part of it because I had it open in the background and it kind of backfired on me. So it usually doesn't do that, and it does cache the components in your browser. So the first time might take a few seconds longer, but usually it loads up pretty good. Yeah, so some plants, again, we have the minimum requirement of 10 megabits per second, so you need to be within that. But as long as you're above that, it should work okay.
Okay, so sorry that people is not hearing me properly.
Yeah.
And then they're asking if there's any limitations to amount of users at one time. For example, 100 to 200 users.
Yeah, there isn't. And so that is the case for both our existing software and the web software. Both can operate, whether you're operating a class of 100 or multiple locations at the same time, training at the same time. So because it's all kind of hosted on the internet, many people from many companies are on the system at the same time. And so the way we license the software and the way we deliver the software is based on the number of users, and as many users as you need can be on the same time.
Perfect. So we have a few questions over here from Brian.
Okay.
He basically says, does the software keep track of the time each student spends troubleshooting each module, and overall the amount of time spent on using the simulator? And also he's asking if system works like the students can log in from working from home, for example, like training from home.
Yeah. So great questions. I'll start with the last one and make my way back. Both our systems today allow for anyone to log in from anywhere. So our current system, the one you install on your PC, people can install it on their own home PC. They can have it at a lab. If you have a lab environment in a factory setting or a school setting, for example, you can have it on your work laptop or your work desktops. And it doesn't matter where you log in from, the system is going to figure out who you are based on what you were doing last, and then kind of proceed you through to where you are. And so it doesn't matter where the student or employee is, as long as they access the software, both on the new web version or the installed version, both work fine. And both you can log in from anywhere. In terms of the first two questions, they were related to what, sorry?
If you can track the timing.
Oh, you can track the timing. Yeah. So yes, especially the new one is a bit easier because you can track that timing because we reflect some of that data back into your LMS if you have one, or hours if you're using hours. But yes, it does track the amount of time somebody spent in a module or overall. And we do have a reporting module that we make available. So both our solutions have some reports available to the managers, but certainly the new 3D, the new web version has the additional functionality of tracking time spent training, where we did not have that before.
Perfect. So we also have a few questions here.
Okay.
If they are asking, Chris is asking, if will you add restrictions based on tool limitations in the future?
I'm not sure what that means. Chris, can you elaborate more on that question?
In the existing program, I can put 1 meter lead on terminal on the left side of the room, and on the other meter lead on the opposite side of the room.
Okay, so this is when you're basically testing in multiple in multiple cabinets. So you should be able to do that. You should be able to do that with a new system. The simulations themselves are fairly similar. They are being tweaked. Like, for example, if you're familiar with our control circuits one, it's a very different scene, but the setup is similar, and you should be able to do pretty much similar levels of troubleshooting. And you should be able to take similar types of measurements, in the different scenes.
Perfect. So then they are also, Clark Sarge is asking if the system includes lessons on theory behind the exercises.
Yeah. So again, I'm not sure if you're familiar with our software or not, we do include some base knowledge in our modules. So whether it's the existing product we have on the market or the new one, both are designed to give you the basics to allow you to troubleshoot the sims. It doesn't mean they are like we're expecting some people to have base knowledge. So like we're not replacing a school or something like that. Like they have to have base knowledge that they acquired from somewhere. Now we refresh that, we enhance it for troubleshooting because that's our focus. But we don't teach electricity, for example, but we will give you the tools you need to understand how a meter works and how to read a schematic so you can actually troubleshoot. And so all the learning has learning components with it, with labs that you can do. But you do have to have some base knowledge that you acquired somewhere.
Okay, so we also have one question from Michelle. He's asking if we have more than 7 modules than the regular ones that we have in the 2D product for the 3D.
Yeah. So great question. Really, they are the same. So we're converting the existing product that we have to the web version. We've been developing VFDs for some time, and we're hoping to roll that out soon. VFD challenging, as you can imagine. So we're working hard on getting that. When that comes out, it will be rolled out as well into our web version. We're still not there yet. One of the things that people rely on Simutech when they're training is to get accurate results with all the components and so on. So we do take time to make sure that whenever we're developing something that it's working. So hopefully that will be coming soon, but VFDs will be the next thing that will roll into the web version.
Okay, so we have another question from James. He's asking if the users can customize the simulations, or it's just only the ones that we have created.
Yeah, so you have to use the ones that we created. It is really hard to customize the scenes. There's a lot of engineering behind it, and the way the scenes get wired up and rendered. It is not easy for us to allow an end user to change them. We have in the past done some custom work, but in general, you should be able to learn what you need to learn based on the way we've wired up the circuit. Now, for example, in our existing product, if you launched our PLC program, you can change some of the variables, but you can't change the program itself. You can't load your own PLC program because it has to match what's there, right? But you can change, for example, if the system was supposed to do something after somebody presses the button twice, you can change that to like 3 or 4 or whatever. So it does allow you for a little bit of flexibility, but you really can't change the design of the circuit. It's not that straightforward.
Perfect. So also James is asking if the simulations are SCORM compliant.
Yes, they are.
Perfect. And are the scores automatically imported into the LMS?
Yeah, so there's two portions to this, Chris. There's the learning labs, and that's where you're kind of getting the refresh on the base knowledge and learning how to use a meter, for example, how a motor works, and so on. Those scores are imported straight into the LMS. Okay, the rest of it that comes from troubleshooting. So what I demoed earlier today, those scores we collect way more data than LMS can handle, because we really are tracking every click that a user is doing when they're in the simulation. And we're doing that so we can advance them through the learning in a way that is custom for them. And so because we're tracking all that data, we have to use a different style of database to do that. And that's why we make available to our customers a reporting module that has a summary of that data that complements what's in the LMS. So your LMS is going to show you how well you've done with the learning labs and with the learning content. It will show you where you are in terms of troubleshooting, but it will not give you the troubleshooting score and the breakdown of that score. You have to rely on our reporting module.
Okay, perfect. So Greg is asking if we are working on a version for Chromebooks or tablets.
It's tough to do because there's a lot of graphics and a lot of stuff being rendered through the browser. In most cases, it just doesn't work. And in some cases, it's just the way you interact with the components. So for example, if you wanted to go replace a part, or especially when you come to the later modules where there's PLCs and sensors and so on, you have to perform some functions with a right click of a mouse or with the right click on your pad, right? And that's really hard to do in a tablet setting, right? So the concept of a right click does not really work well if you had an Android tablet or even an iPad, right? So for now, that is not something we're going to do because it just doesn't render that experience properly for the end user.
Okay, and if Juan Manuel is asking if we're based on American standards or we also have the European.
Yeah, so good question. So the existing product we have in the market works in both European and North American standard, works in English and Spanish. Okay, so if you have trainees who are in Europe and you want to train them tomorrow, you can go on that system and it's good to go. If you absolutely need to do the web version of that, the IEC is under development, so it's not live yet. It will still be a few months. So we're finishing the conversion right now of the existing modules in North American English. And then when that's done, we're going to loop back and do the rest. So while we're working on that in parallel, it's not ready and it will be a while. So, the ideal thing to do is if you want to start training somebody in the European standard, start using our existing 2D product.
Yeah, probably you want to finish with your slide.
Oh, I have one more slide and then we'll take questions. Okay. All right. So I just want to kind of do it. Actually, there's not much left, kind of just more of a wrap up, just if you're doing electrical training, especially troubleshooting, the skills gap is there. You just have to understand what that actually means. And it's really not about, at least the way we see it, is not about the, age thing or about the base knowledge thing. It's about troubleshooting and thinking through problems. And that's the missing link sometimes we find in the market. So try to think about how you actually bring that knowledge internally and use different tools, use your existing staff. You could use products like ours to kind of put it all together so that when somebody's coming in new to work, they have all the tools and best chances at actually succeeding. Use a systematic approach. Have one. Doesn't matter if it's ours or yours or you got it from somewhere. Just make sure you have one that everybody across the board is using. And our approach is available on our website. Anybody can just download it and start implementing it without the aid of additional tools or software. Create that training culture, that training organizations, like we talked about, schedule things. Make sure you have people following up. Everybody's accountable. And make sure training is not a one-time deal. It never was intended to be a one-time deal. Like I said, the best pilots in the world who we trust with our lives, no shame. They go back in the simulator every once in a while, actually more often than you think, and practice and practice and practice. It's a good thing. So create that culture. It's a lifetime of learning where it's continuous learning all the time. And so with that, I was supposed to say questions, and we've handled a lot so far. So let's take a few more.
We have a few more over here. Okay. It's about Chris, and it's about the variable speed drives or
VFDs. Yeah. Okay.
So what's the status? When will be released?
Yeah. So like I said, they're quite difficult, as you can imagine, because there's just different varieties and flavors of VFDs, and you have to simulate all of that in the system. So we've been working hard on them for some time. And we're hoping to release them in the next couple of months. The way they're going to be rolled out is they're going to be 2 learning labs and 1 simulation. And so we will start releasing them as they become available. The first one really just introduces the topic of a VFD and how to configure one and how it works. And then we then advance the user into a full simulation after, where the VFD is interacting with the whole scene. And so it's been something we've been working on for some time, and we were hoping to roll it out as part of this new delivery system through the web. But you know, it is taking a bit longer than we had anticipated, but hopefully it will be out soon.
Yes, perfect. So we have another question over here. Like, how do you create an onboarding survey?
Yeah, so for new employees, I would imagine that's the question. How do you create an onboarding survey? Yeah. So look, it starts with mapping out what the employees are supposed to do when they show up to work for you, and trying to map those questions to that. So if they're going to be doing some very basic troubleshooting in the beginning, that's fine. If they're expected to do more complex things like configuring a PLC or maintaining a PLC, well, you need to adjust your onboarding checklist and survey, so to speak, to that. So one thing you can do, if you're using our system, you can create an assessment or create a custom test where you can give them faults to troubleshoot as part of that, right? So create your questionnaire, understand what their base knowledge is, understand what experiences they've had, even down to the specific components that you have. That gives you an idea of what they're capable of. If you want to test that and get a measurement of that, you can either observe them doing it on a workbench, or you can use a simulation like ours and get the data of how they performed with that simulation. And then that will give you an idea of what their skill set is. Then based on that, you can figure out, okay, they're good with these things, but weak with other areas. And then you can create your training plan for them that way. But it starts with mapping out what you want them to do when they come to work.
Okay, perfect. So then we have another question, like how you can customize the content learning for a user until you plan a new start date.
So how do you repeat it? Sorry.
How do you disable learning content for a learner until you plan a new start date? Like the content, how you customize, like based on modules.
Okay, so again, the way it does have to do with what they're doing when they come to work or when they're at work. You can do, in our system, you can go down an electromechanical path, for example. So get them to do our initial bunch of modules, learn the basic troubleshooting, get into control circuits, motors, and then get into systems that are all electromechanical control. Versus, let's say, someone who is going to do more PLC type work, then you're going to take them down that path. So you can basically take a look at the content that we have and map it to what they're doing. Now, one thing that we do provide to the administrators of the system is a description of every fault available in the system. And so if someone, you need them to train on a specific topic or even specific type of fault, you can literally get them to go through the learning first and then use custom tests and assessment to progress them through down a path that is specific to them, if you needed to go to that granularity of training. Our recommended path is to let them flow through the system, right? As they flow through the system, they're going to practice stuff that they know, and there's never anything wrong with that, because practicing reinforces what they learn. Or at the same time, pick up the skills that you really want them to focus on. So it might take a bit more time, but it's worth it.
Perfect. So also Neil is asking if we can troubleshoot with VR headset.
Yeah.
With the software.
So we are using Unity. If you're familiar with Unity, it's the same technology used for video games. So if you're playing Xbox or if you play PS4, we use the same technology to render the new content on the web. That is why, for example, it takes a minute to load, not a minute, but like a few seconds to load when you first load it, because Unity is launching and rendering all that content. The great thing about Unity is it does allow us, if you wanted to, deploy in multiple platforms. So we can deploy to a laptop, we can deploy to a VR set, we can deploy to the web. We have not yet deployed to a VR set. We are finishing or completing the conversion of what we have right now. And then probably in the future, maybe next year, start working on that. It does require a different way of approaching it. So the system is capable, but we are not there yet.
Perfect. And then we have, let me see, if there's any administrative access for instructional staff.
Yeah, there is. And so again, in our current 2D product, if you purchase the software, you get access to a course manager. You know, the software, that software piece allows you to invite users, manage what content they see, create custom tests, look at the reports and assess them, things like that. So that's available for free. You can have as many administrators as you want. In the new web system, it's kind of similar, even though it's different. That portion of administration ends up in your LMS if you have one. And again, if you don't have one, you can use ours, but you're relying more on the LMS to kind of allow an administrator to manage access to the software.
Okay, these ones are more, I guess, sales questions. Okay, one, Adam is asking if they can have like a demo before purchasing the software.
Yeah, that happens all the time. So people take a look. Our sales team, it shows, you know, pretty much goes over the different components of the product, and then sometimes people want to take it for a spin for a week or so. That's no problem. We can make that happen. So if you're interested, either email our sales team, so sales@simutechmultimedia.com. My email is available here, so samer@simutechmultimedia.com. You can drop me an email, and I will forward it to the sales team, and they can follow up with you.
Okay, we have one question from Todd.
Yeah.
It says, like, do you include solid state relays and contactors in your simulations?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And then Joshua is asking, based on college, okay, if they said, like, how many administrators can you have?
You can have as many administrators as you want. We don't charge a license fee for administrators. We just charge license fees for users.
Okay, yeah, perfect. That's it.
Great. Well, thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. I'm thankful for all the questions that you've asked today. It was a fairly interactive session, and I really enjoyed that. So I appreciate it. If you have any questions about the content I shared or some of the research that was done by other parties related to troubleshooting and how to best train your staff, let me know. And happy to chat about all that. And if you would like a demo from our sales team, like I said, email sales@simutechmultimedia.com or email myself, and we'll make that happen. Again, like I said, this demo / webinar was recorded or is being recorded, and we will make that available to all those who attended early next week. So with that, thank you very much. Have a good day, and we will see you soon. Stay safe out there.